Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and today we're gonna have some fun because you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna talk about books. What every theology nerd struggles with. What books to get? How many books to get? How many more books to get? And is there a way you can somehow write them off on your taxes? Along with, you really want this book, but also you don't want to give Jeff Bezos any more money right now. And so, in a series of complaints and reflections about this, along with the emails with like, oh, my partner loves your podcast. What book should I get them for Christmas? And that kind of thing. I was talking with my buddy, Tom Webster here, who's the editor at Orbis Books, and I had an idea. I said, what if we each pick 10 books that y'all publish that a theology nerd, we're both theology nerds, both have PhDs in it, like doing it all day long, that we'd like to get under our tree for Christmas. And then we'll give little blurbs to give people ideas as to what they could get their nerdy partner. And then he's like, okay, but what if we gave them a code called Zesty, and then they can get 30% off, order directly from Orbis, get a discount better than Amazon gives, and Bezos gets nothing. So there's
the dream.
Yeah. So that's oh, and you're right. Lori in the chat wants to say books deserve air horns. Yes, theology books do deserve air horns. But before we get into it though, Tom, do you want to give a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself and people, if you haven't heard his episode previously on the podcast talking about process ecclesiology and stuff, you should definitely go check that out. But maybe say a little bit about what in the world it means to be an acquisitions editor at a publisher. And then we're going to jump in and we put all of our books, the pictures of the covers on slides. We'll just give you the like elevator pitch. And then you'll go, oh, my theology nerd would like this. And sometimes, my theology nerd equals myself, because nothing says self-care like making sure you're going to like the theology books in your stocking.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, if you've not listened to the episode that Tripp so graciously had me on over 3 years ago now, which is wild, to talk about my work as a process ecclesiologist, go torture yourself for a while and listen to that one. I am a theologian and a United Methodist pastor. I study from a process, liberation, eco weaving of methods and questions. I study how the church lives within the world as a natural part of God's life with the world. I focus a lot of my work on the Eucharist and the sacraments, and particularly how we can be better relatives with our creaturely kindred through our sacramental practice. So that's a little bit about me as a theologian. It's also why you'll see when we get into these books, we've got a couple of ecclesiology books on deck that are from my list. So like I mentioned, I'm a United Methodist pastor, and we serve where the bishop wants us to be in ministry. And I happened to have a very creative and visionary bishop when I was coming through my ordination process. And when I said I was called to the educational ministry, and that Orbis Books wanted to hire me as an editor, she was like, yeah, that's ministry for sure. Particularly because you're an acquisitions editor. Mm-hmm. Because what I do as an acquisitions editor is I recruit authors to write books for Orbis, and I recruit them and I work with them through the entire writing process, all the way until it is time for like a copy editor and a proofreader.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had a call this morning with a scholar I'm really excited about, where we talked about, some of my work is developmental, where we've still got ideas that we're batting around. We don't really know what we want to get on the paper yet. How can we craft that? Some of my work is reading journals and magazines like Sojourners or America Magazine, and reading an article and going, ooh, that would be really interesting to expand that out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here's a real clear vision and idea. Let's run with that. Sometimes it's going to fun conferences like Theology Beer Camp or the American Academy of Religion, and listening to papers and keynotes and talking to the presenter after and be like, hey, I think there's a book in this. Can we figure that out? So yeah, I bring in authors. I work with existing authors that we've had relationships with for a long time. And we publish at Orbis, we publish about 50 books a year. And I'm responsible for anywhere from 12 to 18 of those 50 every year. And am excited to share some of those with you. Some of the books on the list are books I've worked on as an editor, and they happen to also be on my what I think your theology nerd should read list. Some of these books that are on this list are like absolute classics that have shaped our educations in our various fields. I'm a little jealous, actually, of these folks who are going to get to read some of these for the first time. So I'm excited.
Yes, I understand. So the format, never tried this before, but I get emails with people asking, what should I get? And I'm like, do you know what their favorite episode is? There's always that way. Or you could ask, what are a couple of your favorite episodes? I know you like this podcast, and then see what book we were talking about. But this is a new way of trying it out. And in the chat, I put a link. You'll see the whole collection of all the books we're going to talk about. Use the code Zesty, get 30% off, but you don't need to go there right now. They'll ruin the excitement when we tell them to you. But
and that code is good because Christmas lasts for 12 days, and then we've got Epiphany, and Epiphany runs all the way until Mardi Gras. That code is good for the rest of Advent. It is good for Christmas, and it is good all the way until Mardi Gras. So we're going to be real liturgical.
There you go
with this code.
Excellent.
We're going to be zesty until Lent tells us to calm down.
Ooh, well, we don't need Lent getting out of hand here. It was a little early. I don't want to think about fasting yet.
We need to get Jesus born first.
I know. You can't think about fasting during the holiday season.
Nope.
I just try to selectively moderate on certain days, But all right. So here's what we're gonna do. I think it goes back and forth between us, right? Of which ones we picked. So whoever's it is, we'll just say something for 30 seconds or so, and then we'll see what happens, and we'll go to the next one. No idea exactly how this will go, though. I have no trouble talking about books or with Tom. So we'll see. But I think mine is up first.
Yes.
The first one is Catherine Keller's Facing Apocalypse. Catherine, huge fan of so many podcast listeners. Catherine, rather prolific. But when you're thinking of her recent work, Facing Apocalypse, which obviously published with Orbis, brings together her longtime reworking in the process style of eschatology, and then is asking it in the present moment with all the different crises that we're facing, be it ecological and political, economic. And so it is both a creative, constructive work, and look, it was one of the most popular episodes on the podcast when we talked about it. So I know a lot of people like it, and yeah. I mean, it's hard. There's hardly a theologian that's as enjoyable or savorable in their writing as Catherine.
Agreed, completely. She was one of the first process theologians I remember reading in college. And I think one of the things that attracted me to her work so much, and it certainly continues in Facing Apocalypse, there's a beauty of the craft of writing.
Mm-hmm.
She's very attentive to how language works on us as readers. That not all theology books can you just like fall into like it's a novel.
Yeah.
And she really has that gift as a writer, and it envelops you as you read.
And you've discovered apparently it's transferable to some of your students, because
Yes, it is.
All right, well, here's Tom's first pick. What's it going? Where's it going?
So speaking of one of her students, O'Neill Van Horn, this book has just come out with Orbis. It's called Making Hope: Practices, Prayers, and Parables for a Changing Climate. O'Neill was one of Catherine's students in his graduate work, and the craft of writing and the attention he brings to the reader, the compassion that he brings to the reader, really is transformative. So this is a book that is encouraging us to rethink hope, particularly in the time of climate change, to rethink hope as something we make through regular practices. Like there's and each practice has a chapter. So there's a chapter on mending, like clothes mending. There's a chapter on cycling. There's a chapter on birding. There's a chapter on composting. So there's a beautiful process theology inheritance there of, instead of thinking about hope as some substance that you have or don't have, rather it's an event, an emergence that we live into and we create and co-create in the world. There also, though, this fall has been chaotic in my own life, and the pace of this book, the spiritual depth of this book, to encourage the reader to slow down without making you feel bad for feeling hurried and harried, is a real gift. And whether it's for an eco theologian or someone who's deeply concerned about climate change, or if there's just somebody in your life who is interested in theology, but would rather sit with it and breathe with it instead of maybe flying off to the intellectual abstraction of the ivory tower. This really is a perfect gift to us as readers.
Oh, wow, that's a real that's persuasive, Tom. I mean, didn't you just send me this book?
I did, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, good job.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. So up next, my second pick, Elizabeth Johnson, Abounding in Kindness. Elizabeth Johnson's been on the podcast a whole bunch of times. Pioneer Catholic feminist theologian. She who is game-changing text, won the Grawemeyer Award for it. Also done some amazing work. I mean, if you look at Orbis, you'll see a number of her different books, including her Eco-Christology, a new one on what's the title? Breakfast.
Come Have Breakfast.
Yes, Come Have Breakfast. But if someone is interested in Elizabeth Johnson's work and wants a really good starting place, Abounding in Kindness is excellent because it is built on a whole series of lectures. When she goes to speak, and you're giving a lecture, whether it's at a div school or a church or these kinds of things, she's a wonderful communicator of like the depth of her research and academic investment, but communicates it broadly to a wide audience. And the other perk of them being a selection of different theological topics is you can hop into any chapter on the topic you're most interested in, and it stands alone. And then collectively, the Abounding in Kindness is really a description of the kind of, it's a thick, compassionate, generous vision of Catholicism that's intentionally ecumenically open, that is engaging other religious traditions and our social justice challenges and such. But it's a beautiful book. There's a bunch of different places to start at in it, and if you're wanting to get the Elizabeth Johnson experience for the first time, great place to start.
Yeah, this is such a phenomenal pick when I saw this on your list. Whether you've never read Elizabeth Johnson before, I agree completely. This is the perfect place to start. Or if maybe you read She Who Is back in grad school or seminary, and it's been a minute since you visited with or learned from her, this is a wonderful way to teach all of us, whether we're professional theology nerds or just avid listeners of the podcast. This is a wonderful way to teach all of us how to communicate in that open, generous, compassionate way about our theological passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll also say when you're preaching on a theological topic and it comes up in the book, there's bound to be an example that you haven't thought of that clearly has been tried out in a number of different situations and worked. At least that's my experience of going to this book. Is like, I wonder how Johnson explained this. So, all right, second pick for Tom. Oh, and these are in no particular order. So this isn't like the best to worst or whatever.
Right. These are there. So with a foreword by Elizabeth Johnson, Paul Schutz asks the question, what if flourishing was the base theological category for our work? What if our work as theologians, our life as people of faith, what if that was aiming toward the fullness of life in flourishing for human and other than human creatures alike? This book is a brilliant inheritor in a lot of ways of Beth Johnson's eco-theology. It advances, I think, in a particular way, though, to move theologians, especially those of us who think about the earth and the earth community, to move us out of a special interest conversation and into what in Catholic circles might be thought of more as fundamental theology. Let's put flourishing as a foundational category for doing theology, for evaluating theology, and for offering theology to the world. And when we do that, we get brilliant texts like Paul's here.
Yeah, I've got to interact with them before, but I haven't read this book. And you put it back on my radar. I'm worried that I'm going to end up getting most of these books as well. But I do think flourishing is it is a relational way of thinking about the common good. Common good is, obviously already has like a historic role in a lot of ethics, especially after kind of ecumenical conversations took off. But flourishing has like a more awareness of the variables earlier in modernity we didn't pay as much attention to, and thinking of the long tail of decisions and habits and practices and institutional formations that expand the conversation kind of directly.
Yeah, completely. And one of the great gifts that Paul offers in this book is identifying historic and traditional and scriptural threads of theology that paid attention to flourishing, so that it's not just some 2025 conversation. I feel like flourishing is a word that gets tossed around a lot now. And in that way, Paul was kind of prescient in identifying this theme. But for those of us who maybe are not as familiar with or comfortable with early church patristic and medieval theology, he does a brilliant job in tracing this thread all the way through, giving us a helpful ground in the whole life of the church.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. All right. Next,
Yeah.
Grace's newest book. Well, maybe not newest. Grace puts out a
I
lot
think
of books.
I
I think
think
the
it's
intro to
new for now.
I don't. At some point in the near future, the intro to feminist theology that she wrote with Susan Shaw comes out, but I don't know the exact release date. But Earthbound is her eco theology book, new this year, and I know this is one that you worked on with her as part of in your position. But I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I kind of bias in that I like all of Grace's books. What was maybe you say a bit like what did you learn in the process of working with her on this on the book that might be like a unique angle of sorts for someone considering getting this?
Yeah, two things. She has a tremendous gift for speaking uh, meaningfully about theology and doing theology with people in the pews, and people who are not going to get graduate theological degrees, but who care and who want to have an engaged faith. And one of the things I learned as her editor was um, how to be an attentive writer to an audience that both needs some introduction. There's some really good introduction to eco theology and ecofeminism in here, and already has a baseline that they're ready to dive from. None of us are blank slates, and she writes a really inviting introduction
Mm-hmm.
that will dive with you. The other thing that's great. So she's Korean, and she brings in a discussion of Han, the Korean category that's been developed by a number of theologians. But she brings in Han and suffering, particularly as it relates through her understanding of Korean ecofeminist uh,
Mm-hmm.
questions and cares. And that was a helpful expansion for me as a white Protestant U.S. based eco theologian, to help think on a more planetary register, with other communities of faith who are also wrestling with these questions.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right, here we go. Number 6,
Yeah,
ecofeminism.
Melanie Harris, Eco Womanism. This is one of my all-time favorite books that Orbis has ever done in any genre, any category, any author ever. Um, Melanie Harris is a brilliant professor at Wake Forest, and this book I've taught it in eco theology seminars that have looked at the broad ecumenical traditions of eco theology. It's not just Laudato Si for the Catholics. And this book, every time I've taught it, she has this concept called eco memory, where she really asks all of us in the great tradition of womanism. As Alice Walker noted, womanism works for the liberation of all peoples, by recognizing the subjecthood and the particularity of the Black woman, and the personhood of the Black woman. And Harris really does this brilliant move to ask all of us as readers to engage our memory of our place within broader creation. What are our eco memories, and how do our stories, our inheritances, with particular places, particular creatures, particular ecological regions, biospheres, how do those play into earth honoring faith? And for those of us who maybe don't have a very strong eco memory, she gives us tools to interrogate why. What about particular social status markers or economic structures encourage us to distance ourselves from these ecological communities. And every time I've taught it, without fail, this is the one book that gets mentioned on student evaluations as just the greatest experience of the semester and the most important book for the students. It's absolutely a brilliant text.
Well, look at that. If the people forced to read it say thank you.
Yeah.
That's an endorsement. That's an endorsement. All right. Up next, Ilia Dilio, who y'all published so many of her books, it's hard to pick. But
and we're going to be publishing more.
Yeah.
There are 2 more coming out next fall.
But Re-Enchanting the Earth, Why AI Needs Religion. I picked this one because, well, AI is like a rather present to the moment topic. And I've used this book in my AI and religion class last year, and it was a crowd favorite. And so if you're look, Ilia Dilio, I'm sure homebrewed listeners very familiar, because there's no competition when it goes to spunkiest process, none around. She dominates the voting every year. If you want to know what would happen if someone who spent way too much time with Teilhard and Whitehead was to think about AI, if you're sitting there and you're just like, oh, over doomer stuff and culture about it, then boom, Ilia has a vision for AI and is connected to a re-enchanting of the earth, connecting religion and their communities historically back to the flourishing of the planet, the structures of religion we thought we transcended and cut ourselves off of, as we got into the Enlightenment. And so it is a way of transcending and including the different stages of religion that came before, and then thinking about what the frontier of that transformation looks like as our means of communication, the connections that exist, the way information is processed, and all that kind of stuff is changing. So one of the fun bits is just reading it and then going, what if the next 20 years of AI is like the first 20 years printing became an easy thing to do, and all the changes that took place politically and economically and all that stuff's going on. But Ilya's raising the question, well, we should probably think through doing the religion part as well. If not, I think we all know the 5 billionaires who are here to figure it out for us if we don't. So,
yeah. I got nothing else. As I've gotten to edit Ilya twice now, and it like, yes, everything. Yes, it's just another exciting adventure to go on with Ilya. Any excuse, please.
Yes. All right. Well, here's your next pick: Sacred Resistance.
This is a fascinating new book. It came out in March, and I don't know why my light just turned off in my office, but that's okay. We're here. This is a fascinating new book. Mark Clatterbuck is a professor in the Native American Studies program. He's a religion scholar at Montclair State University. And he edited this book, and it's got multiple, I think it's 5 chapters, and each chapter is a different case study of how multi-religious communities, what he calls new spiritual communities, formed through eco-activism work. So there's a chapter on the protesting of the Line 3 pipeline that Winona LaDuke is one of the co-authors of, as well as writing the foreword. In fact, the cover picture is a picture from that protest. The book has some wonderful photography. Mark and one of his colleagues worked on a much broader photographic project connected to this that's linked. There's a website for it that's connected in the book to go see even more. But each chapter has 3 pictures, I think. So there's a bunch of nuns in Pennsylvania who are protested another pipeline that was moving through the land that they live on. There's a great chapter about a bunch of Virginia Black missionary Baptists and a yogi, two yogis, engaged together. There's a chapter on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. So it really is looking at how our real acts of resistance for earth justice can give rise to a new way of being in interreligious friendship and interreligious understanding and multi-religious community that doesn't expect you to convert to my side or me to convert to your side, but instead it recognizes our solidarity together and how we can value each other, particularly valuing indigenous experience on this continent and on Hawaii.
Yeah. Well, it's always nice to have real actual stories.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, and when we actually put it on the ground.
Yeah. All right. Up next, this is a new volume that Ilya, who we've already mentioned, and Andrew Davis, friend of the pod, edited together, and it's exploring the relationship of Whitehead and Teilhard. And look, this book is for someone who's like, what is the connection of Whitehead and Teilhard? It is nerdy, philosophical theology, and then how they connect on a host of different topics. I'm just saying, if you or your loved one is like, oh, I'm a member of the process party and doesn't have the book, then they should get it, or you should get it for them. It's spectacular. And yeah, I mean, it's fun. Like when here's Tripp's thoughts. Sometimes edited volumes, there are 3 chapters in it that I'm like, oh, I bet they said yes when they looked at these 3 chapters. And then there's some others in the edited volume where you're like, I think I'd rather just have had a whole book by, this person on it. But this, because it's bringing together, scholars that are specialists in one or the other, some of them both, someone like John Hott, this kind of thing, they're all there, and they make unique contributions, and the different broadly processed thinkers that are there are the chapters in it are really crystallizing their engagement and their work between the two, and not doing the like, here's my super niche article on a specific thing that probably was written or given in another context that's tangential to it. And there's nothing wrong with those articles. I have those articles in edited volumes. It's just, this is not that.
Yeah, it's, and two more enticing things about this book. One, shout out to all of the process party at Theology Beer Camp. Of all of the conferences I have taken this book to in the year that it has been out, no one has bought more than Theology Beer Camp. I sold out of the copies I brought in about 18 minutes of Beer Camp starting, and I took orders for another like 24 people. So
Not surprised.
No, not surprised one bit. It was like, this is a homebrew Christianity nerd book. The other piece is at the very end of the book, there's a never before published in English interview with Teilhard.
Oh, I forgot about that. That is
so. There's an interview with Teilhard by Marcel Briand that Don Viney translated for this volume. And this is the only place that we're aware of, but me, Ilya and Andrew and Don and I are aware of, that this interview appears in English. And so that's also, if you've got a Teilhard nerd in your your Christmas list, like that right there, good paraphernalia for them.
Mm-hmm. All right, your next pick is Kate Common's book Undoing Conquest.
What do we do about the church in North America and South Africa and Australia and New Zealand and Canada which is part of North America. What do we do with this church if the conquest narrative in Joshua didn't happen? What do we do with a church who, even if it's only implicit, is built on a spread, a colonial conquesting narrative? If we continue to root this, as the January 6 folks did, in the Jericho experience, if there's no archaeological record of the Jericho experience, and in fact, if the archaeological record points to a different origin story of ancient Israel, that's what this book challenges us to ask, and most importantly, gives us a couple paths forward to wrestle as a church. This is a book about biblical archaeology. This is a book about Hebrew Bible interpretation. It's a book about graphic design and how we tell brand stories. And most importantly, it's a book that asks those of us who still find the church meaningful in settler colonial nations in particular, how can we heal and repair our relationships with the victims of conquest and find new stories in our scriptures for a flourishing life for all of us that doesn't depend on genocide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. All right. So next is James Cone's God of the Oppressed. And I mean, Orbis published tons of James Cone books. So, but this is the 50th anniversary of God of the Oppressed. And so that one, I was trying to decide which one to go with. But there's a new edition. So
with a new introduction and a cool new cover and everything.
Yeah. So obviously that's how you decide, because there's so many options when it comes to James Cone. But one of the unique things I think about God of the Oppressed, this is early in his career, and this has, this is at a point where you have like the civil rights movement bringing energy into Black theology, and then the Black Power movement is coming there, and he's already started doing his work engaging King and Malcolm X. And then, like, what is it when you're trying to stand at the intersection of what's going on in the church among the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement? What then do you do with the doctrine of God? And how do you kind of like, this is one of those texts where he's, giving voice for the first time to this vision of Black liberation theology and engaging around the doctrine of God. And it's one of those, for a theology book, it's a page turner. The energy's palpable. And so, if your loved one does not have this book, and you can usually find out if they would love it, because they probably, if they're the right kind of theology nerd, already have Crossing the Lynching Tree. And then you're like, well, what's next? Come on, right here. 50th anniversary, God of the Oppressed, James Cone. Just saying. Great option.
The Cross and the Olive Tree. This is an edited volume from brothers John and Samuel Munir, with a foreword by the very well-known Palestinian theologians Naim Atik and Cedar Douabi's. This is a collection of essays from eight Palestinian theologians who are all about our age or a little younger, Trip. They're early career, mid-career, or still doctoral students. And they're really taking actually a page from Cone's book in Spirituals and the Blues. They're asking, what does it mean to do Palestinian liberation theology as a Palestinian for Palestinians? Instead of necessarily countering Western Christian Zionism, which needs to be countered, and good work is being done there, instead of writing theology for the European gaze or for the US gaze, what does it mean for Palestinians amid the atrocities that are ongoing in Gaza to still be here, to still be doing theology, to still be using Palestinian sources, Palestinian methods? And it's a beautiful, heart-rending book. It also really helps, I think, for those of us who are not from Palestine. It helps us learn from many young Christians in Palestine. Some they're scattered. Some of them are in Nazareth. Some of them are in the West Bank. Some of them are from Gaza. And it really it gives us a chance to embrace the world church as we think about truly the atrocities of this genocide and how people who have been there for 2 millennia are still there as the faithful living church.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of like one of Orbis as a publisher's strengths is Orbis historically is one of the most prominent Catholic publishers, but on top of creating literature, resources, books, and such for the church writ large, they also engage in academic works of theology, biblical studies, these kinds of things, but have been a pioneer at getting liberation theology into English, be it, the primary publisher for Gutierrez and Sobrino and the Latin American liberation theologians, Leonardo Boff, and doing work in science and religion. And some of those will show up, but each publisher usually has like their vibe thing, and so much of it is connected to the editor's personalities, and then like the legacy and who's there, and then you want to be a part of a group that has a constituency that cares about science and religion, or different liberation theologies, or practicing justice within faith communities, and these kinds of things. And I'm sure you'll see it, but we're not just selecting these randomly. Those are like at the very heart of what Orbis as a publisher is doing.
Yeah.
All right, so next, look, y'all publish a lot of Roger Haight books. Jesus, the Symbol of God, is one of the most important Christology texts of the 20th century.
Yes.
There's a chapter on it in my dissertation. I've read this book way too many times, extremely familiar with it, along with a whole bunch of his other books. But if you've never read Roger Haight and want to see what happens with a Catholic theologian, in the kind of Tillichian tradition, then wrestling with all the different like historic questions of Christology, this book is excellent. When I interviewed him about it many years ago on the podcast, the one of the bits I remember, because he got in trouble with some Catholics over it,
big trouble,
and they caused the whole ordeal, which is basically like street cred for a Baptist. You're like, oh, I like this book, and you got in a little bit of trouble over this. This is something. In it, he said, a symbol is an interdisciplinary word. Like when you talk about symbols, there's obviously like the way it shows up as you're thinking about it linguistically, how you engage in culture, and it is a word where you can move across disciplines if you're talking about symbols, and it doesn't immediately close the door to people of other faiths or no faith, or people that don't know what they're doing. And he said, so I wanted to write a book about Jesus Christ, the symbol of God, that gave those that are kind of on the edge of knowing whether they belong space in it, and I want to engage in other disciplines and such. So I use symbol, and some of my friends didn't pick up that I just as easily could have said Jesus, the sacrament of God, and changed nothing in the whole book. And I say that because sometimes that little vignette, I think, gets at where he's coming from, right? In writing this book, is going like, no, like the Christological tradition we have in the church, like I want to perform it for you, but in a way that you don't already have to be ecclesiologically bound to get it.
Yes.
Whether or not everyone agrees he did, and they all don't, is there. But and he has this one bit in about 2/3 through it, through the book. And when he's talking about the person of Jesus, the symbol of God, is that Jesus recapitulates humanity before God in his faithfulness, and in his own faithfulness, Jesus' faithfulness. He makes present the fidelity of the covenanting God to the people. And so, like, the symbol bit, when it gets to like the unique function of Jesus' personhood, is that Jesus is presenting humanity before the divine and divine before the humanity in a non-competitive transformative event. And I'm just like, yeah, why not? Anyway, it is a kind of logos / wisdom Christology for the nerds. And if you're interested and don't have this book, then it's really dumb not to get it. It's really enjoyable. There's a short version too. It's white with blue letters. It's like the future of Christology or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a little more. It doesn't include the whole like rereading the whole tradition in it, but has a lot of the key ideas. If you want the kindler, gentler version, but I miss out on.
No, dive right into the one that the Vatican required us to publish a letter in the back of it that says this is not good.
Yeah. Banned books. Read banned theology books. Off. Leonardo Boff.
Sticking with the Catholics who made the Vatican angry. So
do people get bonuses at Orbis if they get their book in trouble? Is that how it works?
Well, given the last pope and the current pope, I don't think anybody's going to get bonuses if that's the case.
Yeah.
They're kind of the last one. In fact, the Pope Francis, there's a story of Pope Francis asking Leonardo Boff for all of his resources on Catholic eco-theology. And we never had this verified, but there was always wonder or speculation if Pope Francis had an Orbis shelf.
Why not?
Why not?
And
Pope Leo, of course, was a seminary student in Chicago in the 70s. So there's a real good chance that there was a Gustavo Gutierrez or two on his course syllabus.
If you read his first, it's not
Apostolic Exhortation.
Yeah, Apostolic Exhortation. I think it's very clear that he has quite a few Orbis books on his shelf, and I believe it's like Francis was working on it when he passed, so it's a papal co-authored exhortation.
Indeed. And this fall we'll actually be publishing what Francis was working on and what Leo worked on together. As a volume that has both of them in it, which is exciting. That'll be out in late summer.
But this is Boff's Ecclesiology.
This is Boff's Ecclesiology.
Getting excited about banned books.
Yeah. So this is a tiny little book. In fact, I remember I first read this. I actually first read this in high school.
I feel seen when I tell certain people, "Oh yeah, I read that in high school," and they're like,
"What?
You read Sickness Unto Death in high school?" And I'm like, "Who doesn't?" Finitude's creeping up in you. Like, what are you going to do with that ontic shock? But read Kierkegaard.
What do you mean the angst of your 15-year-old self is not perfectly encapsulated in the existentialism of a dark Dane?
Yeah. You're like little preacher kid Tom is sitting there and talking to his parents, and he's like, "I got questions about the church. You know what I need?
I need a Latin American reading of the church after Vatican II." In fact,
Ecclesiogenesis, is that how you?
Ecclesiogenesis, the base communities reinvent the church. In fact, this is my dad's copy from seminary that I read when I was in when I was in high school, and then again in seminary, and again in grad school, and again for my dissertation. So this is a brilliant little book that takes seriously what Latin American liberation theology, both in the theologians we know with Gutierrez and Sobrino and Oscar Romero, what the theologians, as well as what the bishops were in Latin America, were saying about the church for the poor, the church of the poor, and that for the Vatican II documents on the church to recognize the church as a community of missionary disciples in the Latin American context, that meant that the church had to live into the God's preferential option for the poor. And for Boff, that means both tracing what the church's mission and task is and asking really important questions about how the lay people reinvent the church in their own times and places and spaces. For some of us who are not Catholic, there's some internal discord that's trying to get worked out. Like, how do you get the sacraments if there aren't any priests within 200 miles? And the base community, what is the role of the base community for discipleship formation when you don't have a priest to hear your confession? But for all of us on an ecumenical register, I think it really drills down into what is our role and our task as individual disciples who are never individualized, who are never isolated, who are never, we can never, to use my Wesleyan heritage, we can never experience salvation on our own. It is social holiness. And so how do we become the church in these small discipleship groups that disciple one another together, and do that with an attention to the value of the poor and God's own preferential option for the poor.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, up next, Thomas Osinski's The Image of the Unseen God. This book is just spectacular. He's a Catholic theologian, a process theologian, and Image of the Unseen God is one of the best introductions to Christian process theology. It does like the engagement with science when you're thinking about like the God-world relationship. It then uses that kind of framework for thinking through a number of different theological topics. I've taught, a class on process theology a number of times. And last time I taught it, we used this book and it was the class favorite of like, oh, I could use this with people at my church and they'll actually get what we're talking about. And I say this because he also has like a real deal intellectually super philosophical nerdy. What's the book he did earlier on, Creative Advance, or oh man,
yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But he has like a rather thick account of a process metaphysics. That's why I knew him. And then I saw this book coming out from Orbis, and Ilya wrote the foreword. It's in a series that's like made for a wider audience. And you always kind of wonder when anyone that can write a 400-page book about process metaphysics is planning to talk to everyone. And it's clear he was rather excellent in the classroom because it's a spectacular book. I've given it to people. I've recommended it. And he was all scheduled to come on the podcast and then had a health downturn. And then, he passed away. So I have never got to have him on the podcast, but we've emailed back and forth about the book. He did a little thing for the class when we were reading his book. So he's super kind and generous to me. And, but I have no reservation. If you're like interested in giving someone a book, they're theologically interested, and you want to give them a process version, and it's just definitively Christian. So it's not going to, they aren't going to be weighed down by prehension and intersubjectivity and like those kinds of things. But it is a very Christian process theology book, and shows the advantages that perspective brings when doing constructive theology, with the kind of historic questions. I just love this book. I'm very confident that if you haven't read it and you like the podcast, you'll like it. So
yes.
I Yeah.
Completely. Yes.
It makes me
100%.
want to know. I want to know what that book is. His metaphysics book. I know I can see the book, but it's on the other side of my office.
Yeah. You're a little bit farther away from your shelf than I am from mine. So we're going to continue my ecclesiology. You've begun to see some of Tripp's Christology inheritance, and we're going to continue my ecclesiology inheritance. Church as sanctuary, reconstructing refuge in an age of forced displacement. Leo Guardado is a wonderful Catholic theologian who teaches at Fordham in New York City. And this book looks at sanctuary both as a historical practice of the church and in the context of migration, migration in North America in particular, and refugee and asylum migration and the sanctuary movement. He does some really fascinating work with the sanctuary movement in the 80s and 90s. There was a movement mainly in the Southwest and Southern California, but there were some churches in the Midwest that did some really important stuff with it too. But where churches would declare their places of worship as sanctuaries, as legal sanctuaries for refugees and migrants from federal law enforcement activity. And Guardado looks at what sanctuary as an act could do for us as a church when we think about ourselves as the church. What could it mean to be church when our principal activity is providing sanctuary to the refugee, is providing refuge to the refugee. This is an unfortunately timely book. It's a couple of years old now, but it is. It seems like every week it gets more and more important. And so, if you're involved in work, I know folks from Beer Camp who are in Charlotte, North Carolina, or folks from the Southern California, Desert Southwest, who may have a history with the sanctuary movement. This really helps us think about church. This really helps us think about church in a socially consequential way for our neighbors, for our kin, and for people who are longing for life with us.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. This one, Oscar Romero, The Violence of Love. It's not the only Oscar Romero that y'all have, but I absolutely love this book. It is a collection of his prayers.
Yeah.
So if you know anything about Oscar Romero, he was gunned down while serving the Eucharist, and he ended up in charge, as bishop, and as a servant of the church, the bishop. He ended up connecting with the poor in El Salvador, and the encounter and care you have, like the tactile care and connection you have as a bishop, led him to recognize the kind of crisis before it. And because before he was primarily connected with, more of the ruling elites in the area, and it was that encounter with the poor that then connected with his faith. And now the kind of prodding and pushing he was getting from his more liberation theologian colleagues found purchase as he, took on this responsibility of being, leading the church in that area. He became more vocal. And one of the things I absolutely love about this book is just how the prayers, like, watch how he prays. He doesn't hold anything back on like the call to justice, but he always is inclusive of himself and the people that are being called to fidelity. It is like he has this ability in his prayers to be prophetically clear, but not put himself above or in front of others. I find this book moving. It's one of the ones that every year I end up picking it up at some point because I remember something, and then start scrolling through it, set it by the bed for a few weeks, and go back through it. And if you really aren't familiar with Romero's story, you should go find the movie.
Yeah.
It's really good. Like, you're like, how? Like, I didn't know there was a movie about anyone this cool.
And this is also such a great book to be introduced to Saint Romero. He, like, this is all of the writings that we've published of his that I can think of are very pastoral. They're sermons and prayers, and they're theologically some of the most profound work I've ever read. And this is such a beautiful entry into him as a theologian and as a pastor. It's what great pick.
Yeah, no, it's superb. And it's totally something that you don't have to be a giant theology nerd to get.
Right.
Like, it's one of those, if you are one and you're wanting someone in your life to know what and catch the vision of liberation theology, it's giving it to them in prayers by a saint who's got a movie you can show him to show how cool he is.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. So, Community of Missionary Disciples, the continuing creation of the church. That sounds like a good process title, doesn't it? So Steve Bevins is one of the most significant theologians of Christian mission of the last 70 years, if not longer. He's a Catholic priest, retired now from the faculty in Chicago, but for a long time, he was a missionary, Society of the Divine Word missionary in the Philippines. In fact, the cover is a painting of a community moving a house in the Philippines that one of his friends did for this book. This is a brilliant consideration of the phrase community of missionary disciples from Vatican II. What does it mean to call the church a community? What is it? There are three sections. What does it mean to call the church missionary? And what does it mean to say that the church are disciples? We have to consider all of these together as we think about the church. This is a beautifully ecumenical book. It really is in the spirit of Vatican II opening Roman Catholic theology to the rest of us, and also opening themselves to us as dialogue partners and learning partners. And what Steve does in this book is nothing short of a magnum opus, and it really for pastors, for people who are involved in building community, whether they're ordained or lay. This is a really long and sustained and patient exploration of the church on the move, together with God.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yes, you did a good job selling that one. Have
I not sent that one to you?
I don't think so.
It's on the way.
All right. So up next, John Sobrino, and what you're seeing if you're watching the video later is Christ the Liberator. It's the second volume. Jesus the Liberator is the first one. They're both on sale in the series, and Jesus the Liberator was like the liberation Christology that had the single most impact on me when I read it. And here's why. It this is post Vatican II. You're getting the emergence of kind of liberation theology as a movement and such. And this is an academic book. But what he does is, at this time there's this whole argument, right, going on about Christology from below and building up with the historical Jesus and stuff, or Christology from above, where you're taking the tradition. Together, the two books do both, right? So Christ the Liberator is like, let me take the tradition and how we receive it and read it back down to connect with the grassroots liberation Christologies that are there. And Jesus the Liberator says, let's start with the historical Jesus and what we know. And what do you know? Is that I would just, people that are leading a church, in an area where their political and economic futures are intimately tied to the empire of the day, namely America and post-war, they have a setting that is surprisingly more similar to Jesus than North American theologians writing about Jesus, engaging the historical Jesus. And so it adds this whole other element where the kind of political and socioeconomic elements that are just there in the text of the New Testament, the moment you start reading them in historical context, what happens when that historical awareness is being read by someone who's spending time in base communities, working with people who are being harmed, the crucified people of our day. What is it like to be their minister and wrestling with these texts? It becomes clear and palpable in all sorts of ways. You get Jesus's recognition of the perversity of certain parts of institutional Judaism and the way it's connected to complicit powers. Well, I bet that's something to use to reflect on a Christology from below. If you are a Catholic theologian in an area, anyway, you get like there's all these little synergy points, and then he does it in this clear and clarifying way. And one of the things that has always struck me about Sobrino's work writ large, which Orbis publishes tons of it, but Jesus the Liberator was him drawing the connection that the presence of Christ today is and has always been in the crucified people. Yeah. And so part of engaging in reading the Gospels is seeing how Christ both shows up and takes sides with the crucified people of his day, using it metaphorically, and not just literally, but also literally. And then that Jesus has identified himself in the presence of God with the crucified people. So that changes how we think. What does it mean to be a disciple in the present? Yeah, it means to go where Jesus said he would be, at the table, and in an encounter of reconciliation across distrust, abandonment, forsakenness, those kind of things. Think of the Last Supper, in intimate relationships of two or three gathered, in intimate vulnerability in the confession of sin, and in the face of the least of these. In all those places you show up and you can encounter Christ. And Sobrino takes those moments in the narrative of Jesus, reading them with historical kind of contemporary historical Jesus research, and then is thinking constructively in the present. It is just like, it's a banger. It's a Christology banger. And if you've never read Jesus the Liberator, then you're like, there's just a part of your library that's deficient, and you can fix it. It's one of my favorite books, and I don't know, I probably read it 5 or 6 times, and now some of you get to read it for the first time.
And having Jesus the Liberator and Christ the Liberator both in this collection, like, it just, here's volume 1, mind blown, here's volume 2 to keep it going.
I'm just saying. And Christ the Liberator is even more fun when you know that he got, like, people were giving him a hard time after Jesus the Liberator and being like, but what about Chalcedon? And then he's like, here, you got to read volume 2.
Yeah.
And I still, anyway, so yeah, it's excellent. All right, here's your last pick.
It should be a GIF that rotates through.
Well, it didn't work.
No.
Now, you can imagine a GIF, people. It didn't work on the upload here, but most people aren't going to see this anyway. They're just listening. So what is on this GIF?
Yeah, so we have a series at Orbis called the Modern Spiritual Masters series. It's like this huge collection of books, and we just Tripp and I pulled 7 or 8 of them for our conversation today, and they're all in the collection. So these are short excerpts or spiritual writing from folks who are really well known in society or in literature or theology, but it's not like a theology reader. So one of the ones we pulled was Walter Rauschenbusch. It's not like a theology reader of Walter Rauschenbusch's theology. This is like his spiritual insights and the spirituality writing and his reflective mode. And so you get to see throughout the series, and Tripp will talk, I hope, about some of the people we pulled. But throughout the series, you get to see the spiritual consequences as well as the spiritual impulses of some of these really significant literary and theological figures that in our less than compassionate moments as readers, maybe we just think of them as a brain in a vat somewhere.
Mhm.
But there's so much more, and this series gives us a chance to experience them and experience ourselves as so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Walter Rauschenbusch volume is great. One, I mean, I'm just glad that y'all have a Baptist in it.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
but if you are familiar with Rauschenbusch's work, I mean, kind of one of the uh, social gospel pioneers in the early 20th century. It includes like prayers from sermon excerpts, devotional bits he did, all sorts of stuff. So even if you're familiar with his major works, there's stuff in there that you have to go into deep cuts to get. And it's collected and organized and selected in a way that you can read it in a more devotional context. Also, some of the others that we pulled out were Richard Rohr, Phyllis Tickle, Howard Thurman, which is an exceptional collection, Dorothy Day, um, and Bonhoeffer, Dorothy Zole, and Clarence Jordan, another Baptist. Both the Baptists that are in this collection.
Both the and Thurman had a little Baptist influence.
Yeah, yeah. But Clarence Jordan, wrote the Cotton Patch Gospels. An amazing preacher. Kind of in the middle of all the kind of racial tensions running through the South in the civil rights movement. Started a intentional community style farm in Americus, Georgia. And that one I really like because it has he translated. What is it translating? I don't know. The Cotton Patch Gospels are he's a New Testament scholar, so it's not that he wasn't using the Greek, but then he puts them set in America, right? So like the parable of the Good Samaritan, which I know is in there, it's someone, the Good Samaritan is a black person who stops to help a white guy who got beat up, like this kind of thing. Like, it puts it in the racial context, puts the cities as opposed to like Galatia, the like Atlanta and all that kind of stuff going on in it. So it has in it, there's sections from the different Cotton Patch Gospels, his prayers and sermons and stuff all in it. If you've never got to hang out with Clarence Jordan, it's an excellent place to start. And I'll just say, as a parent, there's it's always nice to have a version of parables you can use to switch it up just a little bit for like reading and discussion. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and some of the folks maybe who listened to the Emerged podcast that you did, Phyllis Tickle, of course, is huge in that conversation. One of the things I really love about this whole series, Thurman was big in my own doctoral work and seminary work, and the opportunity as a theologian, as a theology nerd, to like the O'Neill Van Horn book that we talked about at the very beginning, the opportunity to slow down and to breathe with writing that cares for us as more than just an intellect. There's an embodied spirituality, there's a consequential spirituality, there's an encouragement to dive into depths of our well-being with these spiritual masters, that it keeps me as a theologian energized, but also humble. That like I could write, I won't, but I could write like a 4-volume systematic theology that is logically flawless. And if I have not loved, what have I done? And these kind of spiritual writings just really help ground, I think, the theological attentions that we've given in a lot of our other books today.
Well, there you have it, friends. There's a bunch of books. Lori's already having trouble here. She already has 11 books on her list. Can't help you there. But
yeah, I'm only going to put more on your list.
Yeah, well, it's your job. It's your job. It's your job. But thank you, Tom, and thank you, Orbis, for saying yes to this weird idea. For those of you that do it, and go check it out. There'll be a link over to orbisbooks.com where all the books we talked about are there. Use the code Zesty. You get 30% off. It's running through Christmas tide. That's, not just Christmas itself. It's the 12 days of Christmas that start after Christmas because,
Counting.
because they follow a liturgical calendar. And yeah, plus, if you're not going to sing all the Christmas songs before Christmas, you got to sing them sometime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's like 50 hymns in the hymnal you got to work through.
You got 12 days.
You got 12 days. 4 a day.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this has been fun. I'll put the link anywhere you're watching or listening to this. The link will be there, so you can head over and drop the code Zesty in there, get your discount, and yeah, if you're regular stuff, let me know. I thought this was a fun idea. I'm glad Tom said yes to an experiment here. But I get messages asking about recommendations for people that listen to the podcast for Christmas, and this works out.
Indeed.
You get recommendations, you get commentary on it, so you can see what matches them. You get a discount, so you don't have to go to Amazon and help a man rent a European city for his next wedding. Yeah, or maybe he'll decide to read some Sabrina and make some.
We can only hope. He needs violence of love desperately.
Yeah. Yeah. If anyone knows of Bezos, I feel like the only redeeming point for Jeff Bezos is that he's making new Lord of the Rings TV show for me. That's like my confliction point. Well,
he would have to pay attention to the message that Tolkien is offering.
I'd love for him to. I'd love for our vice president to as well. Apparently he likes it. I'm just not sure he's read it. Though, of course, I imagine we think that a lot about people that are like, I love Christianity. Jesus is so cool. And then you're like, yeah.
Did you read that? Did you actually read all of that?
Okay.
Which Jesus?
Which Jesus? The one in the Trump Bible. Come on, Tom. That's
right.
Yeah.
Trademark.
All righty. Well, thank you all for hanging out. We'll let us know. Happy to do this again.
Yeah.
And if you surprise someone at Christmas and they're like, "Whoa, what a pick!" Let me know.